really give a shout out at this stage, although I gave it earlier at semi-finals, but it's again. So this shout out goes for my cat, whose name is Mithai. That's what our name is cat for. She's basically a paralyzed cat, and being paralyzed in Bangladesh is not easy. There is no medications for her available, but nevertheless she is really brave enough to survive this far, even after this severe injury. Really happy for her, and she is my mental booster. And second of all, my teammate Rahi for being my supporter here, and thirdly, my friend Hossain for being the host and supporter throughout the journey, and I'm really proud of her. So, okay, my default pronouns are she/her, and BIS accepted after 5 minutes of my speech. With that being said, starting my speech in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. This is how my speech is going to be structured. First, how the world is directly or indirectly is dependent on biotech firms and research into China. And secondly, how does BIOSECURE Act affect it? Thirdly, how is more severe in Trump's administration the major harms. Fourthly, why we are debating about it. And lastly, the ultimate conclusion of our speech, right? First of all, you see the China revolution every day. You see everywhere in the biotech companies, every other companies in the biotech frame is buying the films from the Chinese company, right? Why? Because number one, the raw materials they gave us, right? Number two, the availability of the resources. Number three, the vast mature resources is available on their side of the world. Number four, the massive manpower we are getting from them, and above all, the cheap products we are getting from there, right? This all sums up to one conclusion, that China in the current world is not only mentally very advanced, but also is also providing us with a better atmosphere about the medical in the medical fields, in the commercial areas, right? Now, secondly, what does this BIOSECURE Act has affected so far? Firstly, it has extremely reduced the information sharing that is so much crucial for this bioinformation genre. When I'm talking about the genome sequence, this world is now having some life threats, right? You need information from the other nations. You need information for the sake of the life saving. So that's a very principal argument that we're gonna push in this debate. And secondarily, we have a clear-cut motive here that this is severely threatening US in front of the world in terms of accountability. If you want to be inclusionary, if you want to have a clear disclosure about your biotech firms, you're gonna have the accountability, right? And USA, from the USA lens, being the greatest rival of China, it's your own safety to have this disclosure of information with your enemy country, China, right? If we just cut off the ties, we believe that it severely harms our own people, right? And thirdly, weaponization. We believe that in the world of biology, where it is so much easy for the advanced to misuse it, and in the world where you just limit the uses, we believe that you gave the pathway for the other country, China, to rule over you. And we believe that from a USA perspective, and being a domestic USA citizen, is harmful for my own research perspective and whatsoever. And lastly, that how this is going to create an information monopolization in their side of the world. We believe that in the third layer, how it's severely very effective for the Trump's administration, right? In the Trump administration, we all know how Trump is very versatile with his acts and very violent with his acts, right? And we believe that the amount of cuts we are having in the international pool of students, we believe that the amount of cuts we are having in the research field is the result of this BIOSECURE Act, right? That's exactly how we are facing that. By the BIOSECURE Act, we are one, losing our manpower on our community. Number two, those cheap products are less availability. And number three, the information are really limited on outside of the world, that it's so hard for us, the USA president, to collect this information, which eventually disinterests our own people from this field and just make the research procedure so much longer that eventually the university gets a less funding, you may say, you may see in this kind of world, right? This inherently affects the own people of the USA itself. That's the exact beginning point we're having that. And number two, how it lessens the accountability. When you are applying this BIOSECURE Act on the companies, you still saw that, right, in the previous years, how the big biological firms are still having ties with China. This exactly shows the point of my proof that why China is still reliable partner for the country, right? And now the opposite might come and say that China is monopolizing blah blah blah. My man, to be equivalent to China, you have to know their mind game. To be equivalent of your opponents, you have to know their game. And to know your game, you should have this disclosure, right? You should be open up to your opponent. As whenever you're talking about this biological frame, we are talking about this sensitive issue, right? It's not about someone you carries and stuff that gonna be, very secretive and stuff. But we're talking about the life-saving things that we're gonna bring to the world in the very end, right? That's the whole conclusion of my speech, that having this disclosure about the biological information all over the world, that will make the USA not only be very much competitive against its enemy, but also very much accountable in front of the world. Now the USA may probably be able to produce as much as cheap products as like China, and it's increased their own retrospective in the terms of the biological field. You will see Bangladesh having constant ties with China medical companies. Why? My own father also has this Chinese company's business on the biotech first. Why? The reason being said that these Chinese people are so clever in their job. They know what they're doing. They're so straightforward that people are relying on them on these terms of the advancement that they're providing yourself. And being the USA resident, to be equally gained for, I deserve this particular opportunity, right? And to gain the information is my own right of information. That's all the principal case firstly. Secondly, we hold Peter accountable in front of the world by not getting alienated. We believe that in USA, when this BIOSECURE Act was enacted and still is on the process, we believe that it made the USA itself so isolated from the world research field, and the inclusionary chances from the students, the international students who are studying there, it makes it lessens their opportunity for the future in the biotech companies, right? And thirdly, you will see each and every USA university having at least one Chinese professor. Reason being said that the enormous amount of studies they earn, it's not something made up from the racial stereotypical types, right? This is evident. The China is ruling the world in terms of education, in terms of advancement. They're having robots getting pregnant, right? This is an exact example why China is so much advanced in the first and in terms of information collection. And now it comes to the second most important point of view, that information collection in terms of the biotechnology. You need information, and it's so hard to get the information without this particular resources that is available from the China, and that's the particular reason why the how in the world depends on the China for this biotech firms and whatsoever. Those information are necessary. Whenever you are cutting ties, whenever your administration is imposing that much of restriction, we believe that you not only lessens your own productivity, but also it's a threat for your own community. So don't do that. Be disclosure, say biology. Very happy to propose.
Thank the Prime Minister for their kind speech. Now, handing the floor over to the Leader of Opposition to begin the opposition case. Here, here.
Here.
Whenever you're ready.
Circuit changed me. I take less notes because the info slide is so large in comparison. Look, I know you didn't hear it. So the info slide is so large in comparison to my notes.
I take notes like Fardin Bhai. Very concise. I think Sadman designed it so that nobody could
You
misunderstand.
want me to see the info slide here? Yes, Rahman.
Sadman designed the info slide so no one can misunderstand. Because I have seen finals where government comes up and gives opposition arguments.
Yeah, true. But I learned
Here, Sanjana.
techniques of annotation and making things concise and compact. I'll teach you guys. Give me the opportunity.
I don't know how Ratul hai, but actually it's a collective decision. No one makes the call. Yes, you're here.
All my rebuttals will be integrated because their main claim about innovation does not stand, and our impacts and the mechanisms that we actually implement to reach those impacts are just simply more important. Firstly, we'll talk about the domestication of supply chain in US healthcare. Why US has the capacity to actually actually domesticate these things in the first place. Understand the reason why this reliance between these companies, especially like Chinese companies, exists in the first place, right? Cheaper labor. But currently, with increasing tariff prices, has equalized the field, where there's reason for US to actively want to domesticate these things. Also, US has been dominant in these fields for a very, very long time, meaning they have the capacity to do so. But also understand, shifting from your adversarial countries not only looks like for US, but also to other allied countries, which increases their capacity even more. So, why is this domestication of supply chain so very important? Understand during any public health crisis or economic crisis, this reliance and this having contractual relationship with your adversarial countries actually creates more problems for you than the solutions that has ever created, right? Because these kind of during public health crises, these parts of your supply chain where other adversarial countries have power over those becomes extremely important. But also understand why is Trump doing this in the first place, right? Why is America adopting this very protectionist identity? Because Trump wants to create jobs. That's the primary premise of his campaign, and that's the primary reason for domestication, for this kind of act to be passed in the first place. Meaning that this domestication actively creates jobs that have been stripped off for Americans for a very long time and for a continuous way, right? And these jobs needs to be brought back, and these kind of, which is very important. But also understand, in healthcare, it is important for a consistent supply of products which are at a minimum of consistent prices. Because understand, it is on their side, these kind of political adversarial effects, the up and down nature of economies, especially in different countries, actively impact your prices of the healthcare services that you provide and the healthcare medications that you get to provide, right? This means that under our side, over the time, the prices become more consistent, the services that these people provide become more consistent. And this is the impact of this is something that is more important and more proximal for the US economy and US people. Secondly, why competition in healthcare system is something that gets better under our side, leading to impacts on lessening monopolization. Because understand, how did these big companies operate, right? When they previously operated, they used to collude with Chinese countries and these kind of stuff. They had an over-reliance on this supply chain because of cheap labor and because of economies of scale. But when they're forced to internally restructure on our side, actively pull out their funds from this one specific sector and focus more on domestic supply chain. This means smaller actors can now penetrate the market better. They have a chance to actively compete with them. But also understand, now all healthcare companies are actively playing on the same level playing field, right? They all have similar production value for the services that they are willing to provide or for the medication that they are willing to create, right? Meaning that bigger companies cannot benefit from the varied production chains they used to have before by being actively situated in these countries. Meaning that under our side, the smaller countries actively get a chance. So understand also that as we have talked about it, most industries, the spice and these kind of stuff, have an active reliance on China, and they because of the China, as they already tried to claim, right? China has a good amount of infrastructure within these healthcare systems. This added to the fact that the cheap labor, there is an over-reliance, and these monopolies, these companies that monopolize it actively export this. The impact of this is also multifold, because understand the primary crisis in US right now is the healthcare sector. That is the most proximate crisis for them. The prices are going very up, but these actors have been allowed to monopolize very long and concentrate all their resources for a very, very long time. Meaning that we need diversity, and this needs to happen right now. And this is probably an exclusive way for this to happen, because as we prove, smaller companies now get a chance. Before that, closing. Okay. So, also, thirdly, our idea about how now the third actor in the series, right? The adversarial countries that US actively pulls funding from. Understand, as we talked about, historically, companies like probably Pfizer, right? They had an active role in these countries' governments. They had an active role in these countries' economies. Meaning, even within these adversarial countries, even though they don't want to depend on them, they are still highly, highly dependent on US. And this again, these countries are also facing the same problems that US face in crisis moments and these kind of stuff, where the public health crisis or during the COVID crisis, things were actively barred from there, where health services and health medications that could have solved problems for millions of people were actively kept away from that, right? How do we solve this? Because when also US actively pulls out of these companies' government now have an incentive to invest in their own public health sector. And this will happen because, as we know, health is like an inelastic but their political capacity largely relies on this, right? Meaning that under their side, even within this adversarial countries, probably Mexico, Cuba, these kind of stuff, these kind of countries, these countries' governments are now forced to actually invest within these public health sectors and actively increase and better their own domestic supply chain. Also understand, when companies like Pfizer pull out of these countries and they are no longer actually trying to do business there, other companies that existed prior to this have a better chance of actually trying to get to the same level and actually garner all those users and garner all those same level of demand that existed within those countries. Meaning, as we say, the crisis situation within the US, but also these adversarial countries where they domesticated the supply chain, becomes better. But also understand this idea about monopolization, right? How this inherently affects innovation within these countries. We have seen how countries where these companies like Pfizer and other countries actively stop innovation. They actively want to weed out smaller actors, and that's why our impact of inclusion of these smaller actors is more important than anything they have included in their speech, right? Because we actively tell you how the health services and health products become better for a huge number of people, but also innovation likely exists more because now these countries effectively cannot shut out other countries, and there's probably, along with the creation of the COVID vaccines, the other developing countries also have the similarity to develop same kind of vaccines and actually use this on their own people, and they're not actively barred from doing so by these Western oligopolies, right? Very proud to oppose.
Aarham, can you remind them to ask BIOS?
I thank the Leader of Opposition for that kind speech. A soft reminder to all debaters in the room to please engage with other houses through BOIs, preferably cross-house engagement. That being said, we recognize and hand the floor over to the Deputy Prime Minister to contest the claims by the Leader of Opposition. Hear, hear.
Yeah.
Am I clear or audible?
Loud and clear.
All right.
Sanjana asked for a BIOS.
Call me tight.
Oh, cool. See you on the. It's a good take.
My preferred pronouncer is/him, and I'm starting this speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, first of all, you do have to understand how US is feeling about this ban, number one. Why this thing is most important for the BIOSECURE Act. Most importantly, why China is not in the backlash position. Why China is in the upper hand position, and why including this thing will make your country in a marginally more harmful position. I'm going to explain this one by one. First of all, the Leader of Opposition tried to say that the more domestication of the supply chain in the US healthcare because of the cheaper labor and the tariff prices and whatnot. But the thing is, Trump is trying to make America great again. But the sad part is, it's just working in a reverse way. How? The part that he is trying to work in the healthcare company, he's an anti-vaxxer himself. He is not that much supportive to the healthcare probabilities and the healthcare situation from the very beginning. The main fact is, Trump has always tried to cut down all the research opportunities and the research prices from the very beginning. The NCPI, the PMC, the vaccine corporations, all the companies that have been subsequently hurting from the very beginning, the absence of funding that's going on is actively on the verge of the Trump administration itself. Secondly, the consistent prices increases and all the things that they were talking about. Man, cheap labor was never part of this industry in the very beginning. Even if they're talking about the cheap labor part, it's much importantly fundamentally dependent on the Chinese people in the very long run. If you look about the American health industry, the people, the surgeons, the people who work with the vaccines, the people who work in the biomedical engineering, maximum people are from the Chinese and Taiwanese companies in the very long run. When you are trying to put a ban and tariff on the existing communities of the system, how you are going to cater the communities who have been working with your favor in the very beginning? How you are going to prove the fact that they will not act against your favor? The main fact Trump is more act and more fearful about the BIOSECURE Act is about the bioweaponization itself. The fact is the bioweaponization development and the fact that they have been trying to develop from the very beginning is much more significantly sustainable from their side of the world. China is not in the backhand side of the conversation here. You are already not in a marginally good position to keep up a fight with the country to such an extent that you are going to give a fight and rise to the revolutions in the long run. First of all, come on, you have to go to a level playing field and then you have to fight about it. The more fact that you are trying to bar the medication and about my opposing team investing in their own public sector, the fact is Trump is not doing it in the very first place. it's not about only the smallest or the small actor inclusion. It's about the quality of the things that you are trying to begin with. The fact that even if you are trying to reach the effect and the quality of the factors that the things we are talking about, this thing is not getting marginally harmed by the Chinese community, number one. The second thing is you are going to lose your market value because of your product value in the very beginning, which is an impact which will eventually happen in the very long run. First of all, why am I saying this? The thing is, genome sequencing, genome, all the cellular biology models and each and everything, these are very holistic work itself. Alright. The fact that we are debating on a motion like this, where we are trying to focus that yes, this act is getting affected immediately, you are risking the amount of research activities than the work that's currently going on inside your country right now. Your country is also fundamentally dependent on a lot of the factors that's coming out from Chinese community. You are now, believe it or not, to accept it or not, you are still getting backed up by the Chinese people, considering the fact that the people who work with this, they are not being political about it. If they wanted to be rebellious, the fact about the corona vaccine being very regional in very specific part of the country, it shouldn't have been happening in the very first places. If you were that much open and diplomatic about public relationships and public engagement and dangers about this thing in the very beginning, the fact is USA does not care about this thing. That's the main major part of the conversation. Now, what are the impact that we are trying to show? The main part, how US might feel okay about it. US needs sustainability, true, but acting the whole thing suddenly by forcing it will not bring greater good for USA in the longer run, number one. Number two, the heads of dealing mechanism and the active impact will be so harsh, it will be much harder for USA to implement this rather than Chinese people having to interpret this in the very longer run. Number three, the pushing harm the USA is trying to push by putting the tariff is they are getting marginally lower benefit which is harmful for the Chinese community and the US community very beginning. Now, number four, the most important thing, I'm saying it again, China is self-sufficient enough in medical informatics field. 92% of the bioinformatics research software is currently being developed by the Chinese developer itself. Number two, all the medical certifications, you will see at least 25% of inclusion of Chinese government officials there. If USA is putting a tariff bar on the work that's going on right now inside the United States of America, the reverse brain drain that's going to happen, that's not going to affect the US in the longer run. It's going to affect US in the longer run. It's not going to affect Chinese people. Now, China needs more people inside their country. China wants the people to come back to their country to work on the back. This whole thing becoming active immediately, I believe, the OG believes that it pushes a bigger harm to the US governments in the longer run. Now, we are not saying that we are giving it our secrets to make the bioweaponization less harming. We are making the thing more less engaging in the battle. The development is done in this country, but the mechanism they are trying to push is just not feasible enough. What are we trying to do? The main motion is we are trying to regret this BIOSECURE Act, right? The thing is we are trying to push that mechanism is we will be self-sufficient in research technologies, but the thing is we need to act and our motive much more inclusive about it. We have to develop ourselves up to such to a limit, we have to level up to a level playing field, and then we can fight about it. We have to have, most importantly, there are two major layers in this. This thing, removing the Chinese companies and the adversities in this thing will harm US in two major sides. How? First of all, the act of China and how they will actually act on it. The motive of the Chinese communities will be unclear for them, I believe in this. Number two, that at least they have some level of accountability to the global biomedical association community and whatnot. What are the activities that's currently going on inside the world? Every country has some minimal level of accountability to do it. If you are trying to alienate a specific part of the community who holds a marginal part of your biology industry and weaponization industry, you are trying to help them less accountable of the thing that's already been problematic enough. Now, the research hindrance that we are trying to see, that we have already tried to show the harm of the act. We are not alienating the people, we are trying to fight the vaccine politics and the active working health, the sustainability and the information monopoly that we are trying to push. I believe that the mechanism that we are trying to push here is that you have to have a limit to up to which you can have a minimum informationist and the colonialization probability of your ideologies, and then you can give a fight about it. Otherwise, it's gonna backfire you one way or another. With that being said, I'm very proud. I'm very, very proud to propose the motion.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for their strong remarks. Before moving on, could we please have some silence in the auditorium? I keep hearing beeping going off, which is driving us crazy. That being said, calling upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition to contest and close the opening house. Here, here.
Here, here. Ratul bhai, tu close the door.
But seriously, though, that beeping, where was that coming from?
Yeah, I told them next time it beeps.
Again!
Give it to me.
Stop
I'll
what?
step on it.
Toss it out the window.
If I step on it once, it will stop beeping. I swear.
Stop watches.
Just open the window and throw it as far as you can.
My college resource, please.
Put it in a cannon and fire it into the neighboring nations. Don't do
College
it really.
resource.
I think college internal?
Stop caring. You're leaving in October.
Okay, yeah, I should stop getting that through the
We bring you this intervention while Faisal Raihan scripts to say that IUB, NSU, BRAC are recruiting. Any viewers out there? We have GOD debaters here as well, in case you're interested. Molder of this is by time. It's Faisal.
Are you Facebook living this?
No.
Then what should I do? Do whatever you want. Is where the institution?
GOD.
GOD.
We have GOD, Vertical Horizon, IUB, North South, Aeronautical Engineer, BRAC, IUB, BRAC IED, BRAC again, BIS.
So BRAC contingent on Chiki.
I'm BRAC IED.
BRAC caucus take a defeat with Dal.
No.
Just kidding. BRAC core is too strong.
Right now, the best debate clubs are going by the data BUP and North South. If you look at the data, GOD too, but GOD funding পাচ্ছে না GOD কে যদি ফান্ডিং কেউ দিতে পারতো বাট যদি ওদেরকে ফান্ডিং দেওয়া হচ্ছে তো ওরা মেজর্সে ভালো করতো আমার রিসোর্সেস সুদীপ্ত তো GOD ছিল ব্র্যাকে চাকরি করে সুদীপ্ত কালকে ব্র্যাকে চাকরি করে শীর্ষ ব্র্যাকে চাকরি
Preferably.
Yeah, very uncomfortable in my
Mic to-
because in my ear.
Faisal, mic take 2
I think, yeah.
I can just shout.
Yeah.
That's perfect.
Do it the Sajid Khondokar way. পাশের রুম থেকে
Switch
শোনা
off the
যাবে
mic so you don't cause feedback accidentally.
পাশের রুম থেকে শোনা যাবে
Yeah, you're good.
No, do it the Maruf way.
না সাজিদ খন্দকার way.
Starting in 3, 2, 1, go. This is a regret moment, which means government has the burden to show in absence of this policy what happens. Do they continue with the status quo? What happens to the extremely monopolistic nature of US healthcare? How do they make that better? How do they make the healthcare systems of the surroundings, other smaller countries, which relies on those Pfizers and big pharmaceutical companies of US, which also monopolizes the healthcare system in those countries in the first place? How do they get better in the counterfactual? No analysis regarding that. If we can prove the continuation of that policy when they don't regret, when they regret this, and when they continue the status quo is harmful enough, we should win the comparative. What did they not rebut? Our third argument, when we show that these big monopolistic pharmaceutical companies in US, when are allowed in the smaller adversary countries around them, this looks like Mexico and other Latin countries as well, they monopolize the healthcare sector in those countries as well. Why? Because they give favors to the government of those countries, like, I don't know, tariffs, tax, and revenues, and those types of stuff, which in turn, the government gives them loose regulations which allow them to kill off the small healthcare companies in those countries at the first place. The moment in time when, let's say, they pulled this Biden Act and those companies had to pull out of those countries as well, even if this is a worst case scenario for us, I think it's still beneficial for the small countries because that created a push in the smaller countries to improve their own healthcare system, to create leverage for their own domestic, let's say small startups or pharmaceutical companies to come into power by giving them tax cuts and those types of stuff because that was the last resort to do so. Even in that comparative in our worst case scenario, I think we win on that at the first place. Second, I think their characterization of Trump do not caring about, let's say, healthcare research is false in the first place. 3 reasons. One, 2016 Trump might be like that, but now Trump is very different. Because after he tried to strip off Obamacare, there is a huge pressure on him to actually show alternative ways of, let's say, improvement of healthcare and alternative system of healthcare where there are enough researches happening. It means he has an incentive to allow these researches to happen. Secondly, pharmaceutical companies largely funds Republicans. There is an internal Republican push to moderate the incentive of Trump, to push him or to make him, let's say, allow for the existence of these newer, smaller pharmaceutical companies to exist or thrive outside of those when they are domesticated. Thirdly, after you make this in effect, or let's say when you in effect, there needs to be an alternate push. As in, when you pull this Biden Act, you take off the supply chain. Of course, there needs to be an alternative, right? The alternative is prioritizing the domestic sector because the demographic gives you backlash. Where are the supply chain? Where do you establish this infrastructure? Either within your own country or within your allied country around you at the first place, right? How is this done? Let's talk about feasibility. I think Trump already prioritizes tax cuts, subsidies to big companies or these pharmaceutical companies because it is ingrained in his political policies. Which means they give tax cuts, subsidies to these new manufacturing hubs or the new healthcare infrastructure that are being established in US right now. But secondly, they prioritize healthcare companies which didn't rely on Chinese infrastructure. Why this is true? Because Trump is insane. Even if this hurts his profit instantly, he hates companies which relies on Chinese healthcare. Which means he will actively prioritize newer healthcare companies which didn't rely on Chinese infrastructure and are creating newer infrastructure within US at the first place, because it fulfills its political promise of creating newer jobs and catering to the suburban white middle class in Arizona and Texas and all of the stuff at the first place. Why is this particular extension important? Because it allows for penetration of better competition to enter in US market. This looks like small pharmaceutical companies who have better innovation but could never survive in competition with big US pharmaceutical companies. Why they get fairer ground? Because the disruption in supply chain of big pharmaceutical company means they have to reinstate their supply chain entirely domestically, which gives leeway for already existing pharmaceutical companies to gain advantage. Secondly, these monopolies relies on pricing difference because they have access to, let's say, better supply chains or economies of scale in other countries. But now there is the same production hub for every pharmaceutical company existing in US, which means the median price gets equal for most pharmaceutical companies trying to penetrate the market, which means monopolistic tendencies are broken to a larger degree. But also Trump wants to create an alternative to Obamacare which gives him incentive to do so. Why is solely win such a debate? Because this is the biggest exploitative mechanism for US people. People dying of insulin prices because of these monopoly prices. Basic healthcare in US is inaccessible. This is applicable for the vulnerable majority middle class, working class people within US. But secondly, this means we have more competition. Monopolizers use patent gridlocks to stop innovation because big companies benefit from patent gridlocks because they can demand higher prices. It allows them to shut up smaller companies and kill off innovation, which is their case, I guess. The competitive, this is a unique mechanism which pushes Trump to create the incentive to create a fairer ground. Let's talk about transition. They say current research will be hard. Major research centers are in EU and those Germany and other, let's say, Finland countries, not in China. China has one of the highest cost of healthcare, which disincentivizes healthcare researchers automatically. I don't think that important researchers will be hard. But secondly, if there are such big pharmaceutical companies, they have enough logistical capacity to transport these researchers or create temporary labs in some places to continue the research. I don't think that is that important. Let's talk about innovation. US regulation and antitrust laws cannot be implemented on these big pharmaceutical companies because they use the loophole of their production hub being existent in China at the first place. But now when they are domesticated, then antitrust laws are more effective at the first place, which is a better crackdown on, let's say, innovation or enabling innovation or more competition at the first place. More competition and equal pricing means even to survive, even these big pharmaceutical companies have to constantly innovate under this antitrust law. The way is innovation benefits a handful because these big companies only innovate in stuff which are very niche but very flashy. But basic healthcare access benefits everyone, and this when this is already existent in the status quo. But also for innovation, this happens either ways, because innovation happens due to necessity. Pandemic happened, which forced companies or markets to create vaccines. This is not uniquely necessary for the Chinese talent at the first place. Let's talk about China. China is very subpar in healthcare management. CCP is very interruptive and do not allow for more innovation in that restrictive sphere. So often good companies who erupt there go out of China. Second, they see the bad management during pandemic. Thirdly, after the backlash in post-pandemic, China actively pulled out of global healthcare organizations like WHO, which made their healthcare sector extremely underfunded and isolated. But also extreme high regulation makes healthcare research sector do not thrive there. US still collaborates with allies like EU, Germany and Finland in outside of the house, which is one of the best healthcare facilities where US collaborates with them and attract talents in the first place. The only advantage they had was cheap labor, but China's median wage price are rising, which means they are losing that also. But tariffs 125% wage over the time, the prices of medicines which you make in China also increases in the Arizona. US also has cheap labor in suburban areas. That's why Arizona is becoming manufacturing hub. Proud of it.
The panel acknowledges the Deputy Leader of Opposition and thanks them for their speech. Now, opening the closing house by calling upon the member of government. Here.
You wanted to say something?
Yeah. Alif, how you do this? It works.
Everybody lies.
Keep going for the week.
It's all about persuading that is. That's what BUET is. But some of it's true. So the best lies are ones that are partially true.
My best friend Prince from school days told me that BUET teaches you how to lie on Instagram.
Yeah. Just of the idea of basic healthcare is universal access to healthcare is just
Whenever you're ready.
But nobody said that in this debate.
Once again, I would like to encourage people to ask and give their mind. You'll get to see that from the upper house. So please keep that happening up. Well, don't keep that happening up.
I think he misspoke probably.
From closing opposition, there are going to be three things. Closing government. First, we could protect millions of civilian mass people by right now without the absence of this act. Second, it's a third eye debate. Necessarily, Abir was entirely debate on the perspective of USA. You could be massively benefited with the absence of this act to the larger retrospective ability to the third world country in general, who are the most vulnerable in terms of healthcare, in terms of all of the health facilities. So we could be protect these third world people in large scale. But also, necessarily, you are inventing by your own. That is to say, all the positive material that you could do domestically that they are claiming, you are also right now doing in the you could do by your own, because you're just trading the genes, not necessarily you are just invention solely dependent on others. But we're going to prove two things. First, we want to ensure that how you have to take the first-hand incentive to become self-reliant. So necessarily, right now, as a USA, your food dependency is not completely achievable. The opening government tells you that the USA necessarily doesn't invest that much money to the healthcare, but we are going to take this debate because in order to, in a European situation, be a self-reliant in terms of food dependency, you have to first take the experiences in terms of a short-term manner. That is to say, you have to take this business deal with China like 5, 10 or 15 years, then you can be fully become a domesticated possible in the later run that are claiming by the opening opposition. Right now, USA is solely dependent on the food for Brazil or Ethiopia or the other countries. Why they are being able to do so, Brazil or Ethiopia? Because they easily trade China without any restriction. That is to say, they are able, this is a clear picturization of how you can be able to become self-reliant in terms of food dependency. So in order to be self-reliant, you have to follow that step that Brazil and Ethiopia follow. As a matter of fact, this is the hunt that you are facing over and over. As Trump prefers self-dependency, that all groceries and the local products are not right now affordable enough to the majority state. Only you can afford in the New York or the Los Angeles states. But in order to be self-reliant in the long term, you have to ensure that much trade in the aspect. But the second thing is, in terms of biological weapon. But look at the thing, there was a time when we didn't care about the biological weapon. We thought armors and the nuclear weapons are going to be the real prioritization of this 21st century. But look at the thing, after the COVID, we realized the main asset of a particular state, who are the first world country, are the mass generation of that state. And why the Biden government significantly fall down? Because he failed to manage the situation of COVID. But right now, we have seen that in order to protect this generation, you have to ensure and subsidize and prioritize in the healthcare situation. But if you are stopping this situation, USA losses is huge innocent civilian significantly, because they are still a that much weaker entity in terms of growing domestically. But right now, why USA is most vulnerable? Because your relationship or the ally partners with the European Union, NATO, and even with the Taiwan or Germany, you name it, any sorts of European states are in a relationship with USA are in a much more worse situation. That is to say, if their best case of the scenario in terms of domestication is not possibly hypothetically functional by automatically. As a matter of fact, that already there is a 79% dependency is already hinged. As a matter, in terms of self-reliant, this requires a lot of funding and huge large-scale research. Companies requires a lot of funding and it takes much more time. Even if we achieve, that already cost much more harm that has been done. Like they want to ensure the job for the mass people. I would say the healthcare is not something that much exclusive that USA can provide jobs for the people. Like we have developed in the tech segment, we have developed in all the other segment in the Trump's arena. That is to say, Trump has already ensured many other aspects to create domestication of job opportunities on all the facilities to the Native American. That is to say, they are only burden to prove that they try to say in either ways we restrict the process, we will be able to ensure jobs for the Native American. That is not true. But also in terms of monopoly, look at the thing, when to be on the first place, necessarily I don't find when China is right now in a monopolistic situation is a directly bad thing to trade with. As a matter, to be on the first place as a single-handed player, you need to provide extreme good quality and huge on a larger scale. That could be only possible right now by Chinese. When we trade, you create a long-term opportunity to participate. But look at the situation, how this third world country can play as an actor or role in this situation. Right now, if USA companies are allowed to do trade and business, like they can come up with new form of antidotes or vaccine and many other opportunities, that creates a lot of multiple options or multiple choices. As a matter, the third world companies, even at the companies like BIOSECURE and Square can come up and participate. That creates a marginal impact that all of the entities throughout the world can come up and create businesses. Then the multiple option comes around, the entire benefit of the entire world can be benefited by the healthcare facilities by itself. But why we necessarily don't regret? Two things. One, we necessarily believe that without China, we didn't have any other alternative to begin with. Right now, I don't have that much, or if I wanted to buy any other gyms with any other entities, that would cost much more higher, and that was not effective enough to begin with. That is to say, there was no alternative to buy any other gym for the USA, that there could be a complete suicidal attempt. But secondly, if these are the problems right now, because necessarily all of the people around the world right now believing that USA is only good for technology, not for biological segment. This has created massive harm because you are focusing that only on technology, and all of the people around the world are shifting their focus, they are shifting their priorities from the USA to the Southeast Asia or the Middle East. Right now, that has created a much more harm to USA as in general. That created a problem when you cannot actually target the most amount of people as a USA in terms of your own regulation, then any source of positive outcome is right now not happening in terms of US's growth in general and the growth in general to the second world and the third world country. As a matter, the entire generational revolution, innovation, and all other positive benefit or the materialistic outcome that you are expecting is right now either one is stopped or you are getting in a very slower pace. Right now, it would be possible if there is no restriction and you could work together. As a matter of fact, you would be able to bring in more versatile and innovative healthcare product to serve the most amount of people. If there is a majority amount of quantity of production in the house, the production rate is higher, and the production rate by itself indicates that you can serve the most amount of healthcare services to the people, regardless in which country they belong to. That is the most important outcome that we could get in the our side. Propose.
We thank the member of government for their kind speech. Now calling upon the member of the opposition to contest their claims. Hear, hear.
No one hear about the 100K H1B visa thing? Did no one hear about the 100K USD H1B visa? Did no one hear about this?
I gave a motion on it. I gave a motion on it.
No, I think that would be relevant because we're talking about cheap labor, current affairs.
কয়েকদিন আগে এটা নিয়ে একটা স্পার্ক করেছিলাম কাজী and Ratul.
Yeah, so like, why is that not brought up? It seems relevant.
They all left the spark groups. If they had not left the spark groups, they would have debated on the 100K H1B visa. They would have realized that US actually the opposite. কেউ বলার নেই।
They're good. It's just accept what we are, mediocre.
আসলে আমার এত পড়াশোনা করে কোনো লাভ নেই কষ্ট করে তো প্রতিদিন নিউজ পড়ি কী হবে
They're backed by Hasan Mehdi Ali.
Right, let's get this straight.
So, before I start, my life's first teammate was Zafir. Constant failures and a few heights in JDC, and I always love him for this. And thanks to Faisal for always trying to do what I see with effortless care. Now, without any further delay, let's start. Am I audible?
Yes.
In the last bench?
Yes.
Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. We'll do two things none of the teams has done. First, effective mechanism to show how USA is getting harmed and entrench your market. Secondly, the framing of this motion. Why we should care about USA losing power from a third eye neutral observer lens. CG pointed it out, but they never mechanized. First from the framing. Now, for some rebuttals to mitigate most of their cases. A, innovation. We believe USA doesn't need China to innovate. Research happens in academia, not in companies. There are literal Ivy League institutions out there. Funding is adequate here because you have a major alumni panel who are on the top of the world, and that means you have no scarcity of resources. Secondly, government has more incentive to increase research funding because now these companies are forced to domesticize because of the very policy of the government. Now, first with the framing. We believe this is not an actor motion. So from the US's perspective here, it's a third eye neutral observer lens, and that's how we read it. General impact should be considered, and major missing link between USA losing power and a neutral observer caring about it was completely prevalent within the entire area. Now some contextualization of how this world works. In post-war on terror era, the hegemonic world order has been broken apart. Our world is bipolar in nature. That means it has a balance between power, between two major superpowers, USA and China, who are nearly equal to each other. If one state makes exploitative policies for smaller countries, other can shift to the other poles. This creates an effective check and balance mechanism. This balance completely breaks apart when one superpower gets major control over another superpower's market and basic necessity. This means the world shifting to a more unipolar form of Chinese domination. This is more likely because China already has a stronger economy. This means not only US's economy getting devastated, this means it affects other countries who are less able to opt out of China's exploitative trade policies, including their medical policies. And they talked about like multiplicity of options. It exists in our world where there is a balance. In a world where China dominates the medical field, these countries are more forced and pushed to select this one particular alternative or niche Chinese drug when other alternatives dies out. We don't even need to reach this impact. If this framing works, the likelihood of being closer to a monopolistic world order is enough to win this debate. This is the basic missing link out there. And we also believe US citizens also have the extended layers of vulnerability because the working class is increasing within the US, which no one ever talks about. Now, let's talk about how this mechanism actually works, how China gets disproportionate control over your market.
5 structural reasons. A, Chinese major healthcare companies, whether major stakeholder 5 or 4, these are state controlled massively. That is, the amount of information these Chinese companies have gets directly to the state authorities of CCP's border. These are higher amount of information asymmetry which gets within this. This means joint programs and joint research programs, those information getting passed to the domestic structures of China. This means biotech research information or development of new enhancement takes. All of those innovation information getting stolen directly to China because of the mass surveillance within the party system. The app they use, the app those Chinese citizens use, or the phone they use, are ingrained to bypass those data to the Chinese system in the first place. This means China has a direct leeway to increase innovation compared to other individuals. That is, knowledge leak out of your internal structure. Secondly, Chinese strategy is market flooding. These are they told about this is cheap products. This is precisely the reason they fill your market with their own productions, and therefore comparatively in a longer run your own market dies out in the longer run. Democrats were comparatively less anti-China, but still it was the Biden who proposed this policy. That means the market flooding and taking over was that much likely within their structure. Thirdly, China creates dependency cycle. That means your medicines are not created to cure. The medicine they provide are created to manage the symptoms in the first place. Because that's how you create and hook a dependency chain when they buy your own medicine again and again, therefore you gain more profit. Fifthly, we believe you cannot increase tariffs to corner China in the first place or create other trade policies to actually create barriers in front of China, because you have a massive supply of medicines that USA is getting. That means medicine prices also increases exponentially if you increase tax or create sanctions or restrict their trading policies. That means in your world you have less, USA gets less restriction upon China. Fifthly, China first market not only with high quality products, rather niche drugs. Why this is structurally true? Because it cheap means it has lesser amount of production cost. Lesser production cost means these are fast track drugs. That means they have lesser amount of regulation when they are created, and therefore they are cheaply made. We believe destructive drugs are worse than costly drugs in nature because it entrenches your entire system to actually develop. What is the conclusion? The conclusion is your own company is getting marketed out, and second, your innovative information which could have given you the edge over the other competitive actors is not getting any ground to do so. That means medical benefits are inelastic demands, which means you have major control over US's market, over US's internal structure, which gives China to leeway to break down the balance and have the control over it. Why comparatively our world is better? There is structural reason behind it. We believe when you're less dependent upon the other Chinese industry, you fill that vacuum, you have to fill that vacuum within your own industry. Now the likelihood of it is because medical demands are inelastic. You need to grow your own demands for the first place, or your own companies in the first place. Now this is more likely because now you have a bargaining chip to government in these smaller companies to tell them and lobby through that you are the one who banned those access of other companies in the first place, and therefore we are the only alternative. So provide us more funding, give us more subsidies. This is how the more subsidization and competition increases within the domesticization. We believe this diversification is much more important because Trump also has positive incentives to do so, because creating their independent domestic market within the system means they have far greater leeway against China. On top of that, why we believe this is extremely harmful for all those individuals. Chinese products being cheap is not a stable thing. China, or in a lot of instances, occasionally increases their price whenever they see it is fit, because these are state-controlled products, and that's how they operate. When USA goes against your interest and do take policies which can potentially harm Chinese tech innovation, these production costs are increased, and therefore the prices are increased in general. We believe US's domestic system receive a large chunk of funding already from Ivy Leagues, and the funding is more likely in our world when we are becoming much more independent. Now therefore, we believe in conclusion, we are the first team to show the major link and missing link between our actual motion and analysis motion. Therefore, we believe we clearly win this debate. Thank you.
We thank the member of opposition for their fine speech. Please, once again, I encourage people to take POIs. You guys can be strict. You guys can be afraid of each other. Please be so. Calling upon the government whip to conclude the constructive segment of the government case. Here, here.
Ready? Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Let's understand the true comparative within this debate. In their side, innovation in these health industries inside USA is going to be far more slower. What it means is that if it happens slower, all of the benefits that we talk about comes in a much more slower time, in which that means a lot of the benefits like food dependency, like more research means price getting reduced, and thirdly, how third world countries are affected. All of these benefits come into their world in a much more longer time. That means all of the benefits that is exist in our side of the house gets accessed in their side of the house in a much more longer time frame. That means a huge amount of people get those benefits in a much more later time frame. This is the most important delta and difference in both these. This is very important to understand at the very first of this debate, right? What closing opposition tried to push is that the moment in time we continue this trade, China is going to be far more powerful. We deny this narrative and we flip this narrative by showing you that this is the trade in and of itself is something that keeps China in check, and this is something that is going to make USA a much more competent against China to start with. What does they tell you, right? They talk to you about like China is going to take data leaks and whatnot. This is not exclusive at all, because this trade is something that is exclusively about healthcare industry, but these apps and all of these things are already being used. These data leaks can happen anyway. This is not an exclusive argument from closing opposition that they tried to frame in a bigger way. It sounds rhetorically fancy, but it does not value any ad within this debate. But secondly, understand, China already is far more technologically advanced in research ways than USA, because China has these genomic sequences, China has these machines already built, China already has this information. That means China doesn't necessarily need to block USA from doing it or need to like stop this trade in the very first place, because China already knows that they are in front of USA in this race anyway. That means all of the analysis that they talk about does not make much value within this debate, right? But secondly, the reason why a lot of USA companies are already dependent on China, because China has this unique research, has this unique knowledge that is going to create innovation in our side of the house that was completely not represented in their side of the house. Now, let's engage with opening opposition, right? Opening opposition's main case about they want to do domestication of supply chain. Again, not exclusive. Domestication doesn't if they want to create more jobs, I don't essentially understand that why it has to be created specifically through this healthcare industry. Because Trump has already issued tariffs in all the other industries already. That means the domestication process has already happened, has already started happening in all the other industries. That means this domestication of supply chain and creation of jobs can be achieved through other means of industries that are already happening. So this is not exclusive. But secondly, domestication in their side of the house is very difficult, because the specific knowledge that China has, the specific research information that China has is very difficult to achieve, is very difficult to garner in their side of the house. Small companies just cannot pop up and gain this information. Small companies cannot make this supply chain run in their side of the house and can never compete with these big companies to start with. But thirdly, even if those domestication happens, it happens in a much more longer time. It will take very long years, because this domestication is a very lengthy process. That means the benefits that we can get in a much more faster time. Never happens in their side of the house. But lastly, they talked about, oh, Trump is going to face an alternative pressure to do that or do that. This is not true. Because recently there was a healthcare budget in which Trump literally cut 50% of the budget in healthcare industry. This is evidential in nature. And higher and more important than the structural reason that they proved, because Trump has already created the culture of semi-autocratic nature in which he has already tried to control different institutions in USA. That means the alternative pressure doesn't work on him. But secondly, they talk about, like they are going to Trump is going to actively prioritize those smaller companies who are not connected with China. 3 responses here. Number 1, these big companies, even if they are doing business with China, already have a huge political lobby with Trump. So I don't know, because they themselves conceded there are a lot of Republican political figures who are connected with these big companies to start with. But secondly, they are not breaking down these big companies, because these big companies already have a huge monopoly in the market. That means just because you are stopping this act doesn't necessarily mean that small companies are going to pop up and will be able to compete with these big companies. But thirdly, in our side of the house, it is far more easier to actually for these small companies to pop up, because research information is available in our side which can trickle down to small companies, which is never available in their side of the house. That means it is much more easier in our side of the house. Patent gridlocks is not exclusive, it happens either way, it doesn't go away in their side of the house. So all of the analysis and impacts coming from ruling opposition doesn't make sense, not exclusive, our side is exclusive, but from the why.
Why Chinese talents are so exclusive as in not accessible in other countries, given that most best healthcare research institutes are in EU, Germany, which are all US
If it was available in EU and Germany, first technical reasoning is we would not be having this debate. Secondly, it would not be that 79% of American companies will deal with a with a company like China, in which we have trade relationship or not. But thirdly, we would probably have better relationship with EU and German researchers. All of this technical analysis proves that China has unique knowledge, has unique research that happens in our side of the house. Why do we win this debate? First, we tell you when innovation happens in our side of the house, those innovations are important because in the long run, because those innovations can trickle down to the development of food that we can develop in our side of the house. That this food dependency means that we can save millions of people, or we can make food affordable for thousands of people in our side of the house in a much more faster time. That never happens in their side of the house, and the prices are much less affordable in their side for a very long amount of time. But secondly, more research means more prices getting reduced in our side of the house, because research is also about how you can make it in a much more cost-efficient way. But thirdly, if China is getting advanced in those technologies because US is lagging behind, that means now China has a unique leverage to exploit the third countries, because China already has an incentive to do it, because China does it all of the time. China tries to take control of the third countries. That means all of these 3 harms happen exclusively in their side of the house. That never happens in our side of the house. Closing government is the only house that gives you the most important comparison.
We commend the government whip for contesting their case strongly, now calling upon the opposition whip to conclude the debate.
Debate is comparative. You just need to be better. You don't have to be the best. I may do. He's also in BDC, by the way. Nafis is on Ruman. Farhan Tanner, Farhan বড় ভাই। দুই ভাই অনেক ভদ্র, খুব ভালো ছিল। না ফারহান তানভীর ফাইনাল বড় ভাই। ডিবেট কিছু পরিচয় করে দিই। মণিপুর জিনান স্কুল, এই যে জিনান দুই ভাই অনেক ভালো।
Am I audible clearly? Yep. Alright, before I start my speech, I'll give a huge shout out to Ishrak. He also was my best teammate. And yeah, I think that's about it. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. start, even to Democrats who are not as ferocious as Republicans again in anti-China issue, they are the ones who initiated this. That means it's an urgent threat unanimously agreed, which needs to be solved not only for US's sake, but for the world's political order to not lean towards one particular thing. And that's why it's important. O only talks about how US needs to get better. What CO talks about is the world order is in a problematic zone where China can get a lot of control, and that needs to change. And that is an important thing which makes sure that we're talking about in the third islands. We'll present two things. Number one, why easy and cheap alternative or the cheap illusion of China is bad and actually costing US even more and the world order even more. Secondarily, I'll also explain the global power order, how it changes, and I will also give a simple analysis of how future bioweaponry can be affected by that is at the end. But let's start with the most important ones. What CO talks about in this debate? CO talks about probably number one, trade keeps China in check. But there are two responses to it. Number one, I don't think trade keeps China in check. Two responses. Number one, China is already autocratic. That is, they don't need to pay heed to whatever you say. That means just because you trade with them, it doesn't mean that China will give you all the information that they have. Secondarily, but inadvertently, just because you trade with China, this makes China in a more leveraged position, because your sanctions won't work in China that much. Because if US wants to sanction for a bad deed that China did, now China can claim if you sanction us, we'll increase the prices of the products that you import from us, and that's why it's really bad to keep China in check. But thirdly, also OG also talks about that probably you can share information about biotech, but again China won't ever give you the secret biotech info. Rather, they are likely to deceive USA, because I'm just in panel. Deceive USA. So USA will feel like they have information of China. That's why they will go through an Icarus complex, which they will feel like they know everything, but it prevents them from going further and assessing the risk that China actually possesses. What is the actual impact of this? The main problem here is China actually knows what type of products that you're buying. You don't know what China is actually doing. That means there's already a huge gap. That means if you are to make any biotech products, if you are to make any bioweapons, China exactly knows what things are you importing. That means China accurately predicts what type of bioweapon or what type of biotech you are going to make. That may give China a huge leverage in terms of everything that they are doing, right? That means China is better. China is knowing US's moves, and China knows US is dependent. That means it's leaning towards China more. The political global order is hard. Secondarily, in terms of cheap products, two responses here as well. Number one, I think Ishrak already explains, when China holds the leverage, they can increase prices at any time. That means your cheap products are not cheap through generations. Secondly, that's why it's important to create more opportunities within USA, because more competition within domestic corporations means that there will be cheaper products in itself, right? But thirdly, another problem was Trump wants to cut down research, and there was no response to that. Two responses here. Number one, I think Trump wanted to cut down resources because there was an easy alternative to China. But now, as US Trump is actually imposing this BIOSECURE Act, that means they are going to you as a government. You have the obligation to give them more subsidies, give them more opportunities, right? That means give them more. That means research happens through government subsidies as well. But secondly, even if government doesn't fund them, Ishrak already explained how Ivy League universities are actively funding researchers and actively initiating researchers. Why those researchers are likely to be effective? Because those researchers are also funded by the most talented ones out there, right? And also, as government is funding them, as government is the one who is actively making companies worse according to them because they cannot get cheap products. Government is the only one to mitigate it and to create a counterbalance. They give more incentives to corporations in two ways. Number one, they give more opportunities. Secondarily, they subsidize researchers. That means existing companies in the US also get benefited when they conduct research. That means they can attract talents because of the funds they have and the modern incentive they have. That means researchers is better off at the end of the day. That means US can actually make products, and which products will actually generate to more alternatives, which will eventually make USA independent of influence from China. And that's exactly what is the most important thing, right? Now let's engage with CJ a bit more. They talk about China will get data regardless, but the crucial nuance here is the type of medicine that you're importing from a country. This info is not publicly available from everywhere. Unless you actively trade with China, only then China knows that information properly, right? That means the impact is China knows every single biotech product that you're importing from them, and China knows every single move. That means they are in a better better position to actively engage any sort of leverage if there's to be a US-China biotech or a bioweapon risk in the future. That means if they get the leverage, that's why we don't regret the act, right? Because if they get the leverage, China gets more domination, China gets more power, the world order changes, and the world order changing means one particular country is taking more power. That means it's affecting the global world order. That means if China unanimously gets advantage in the biotech weapon race, that means China is the only one who is powerful here. China will do all the autocratic things because China is not controllable by anyone. China is an autocratic nation. That means they cannot be electorally accountable whatsoever. That means they can do whatever they want, and that will cause a lot of havoc in the global order, right? That's why we regret this. That's why that's why BIOSECURE Act is important, so that China doesn't get this much leverage, and USA can create a counterbalance so that USA can also grow their own biotechs and eventually compete with China on a global level, right? But again, now let's move to more important things, right? Understand panel again. The main thing is Chinese state-owned companies are state-owned companies. They are not private. That means there are sensitive information that comes through trades goes straight to CCP. That means they have more leverage because they know the US context well. They can raise prices or can affect them artificially as well when US is going through a bad period, right? And that is bad. Sure.
The PO is I'm just buying one single Z for some raw materials. I don't know how your entire case was based on the fact that I need the same patent or something.
I don't need patent. I know what type of raw materials they're taking from us. I can predict what type of weapons they can make in the future. That information is strictly important because if those information is available, China knows that and China can create counterbalances. That means China is better equipped to actually get against whatever USA makes, right? That means it becomes very one-sided at the end if there's a bioweapon race or biotech race to happen in the very first place, which gives China the reverse. And we have already explained, I don't think China getting better or USA getting better is the solution. I think there needs to be multiple world, and that's why any one country getting more leverage is bad for the entire world. That's why it's bad. We are not the side who is defending just because USA is harmed. That's why we support this BIOSECURE Act. We believe because of the BIOSECURE Act, USA gets a chance to actually compete against Chinese leverage, and that makes the entire world order better. And overall, that's the main reason why it's very, very important. But overall, again, let's summarize right now, right? Like overall, what we achieve. Number one, in our side of the house, we are independent. We are not dependent on China. That means we can generate easy or cheap alternative, we are not relying on the alternative of China. We can generate on our own. Secondarily, the most important part: what happens to USA, what happens to China, doesn't matter that much. We believe if the global power order shifts to one side, that is bad. We give you explanation why the global power order is likely to stay outside the house, and that's what we will do.